Alright, what's going on, everybody? This is Alex once again with another episode of the EOT Newsflash, and we are back with our Core 2020 Limited Set Review. The pre-release is only a few short days away, and I want to make sure that you, Mr. or Mrs. YouTube content viewer, are best prepared and can walk into that pre-release and win as many prizes as possible. So we're talking about all the cards, and tonight we are doing the black ones. We're going to kill things and occasionally bring a few of those things back to life. Now, if you have not watched one of these videos before, we're operating on a 6 technical point scale. The first 4 points of that scale are the ones where the cards that you should probably never play because they're all trash. 2s are your more generic filler that will always be in your deck. Basic creatures, basic spells. 3s are your more premium creatures, removal, power uncommons, things of that nature. And your 4s are your absolute bombs that when you play them, they up in the game. You open your booster pack, you see that in the first pick of your draft. Those are the really powerful cards that will pull you into a direction and really set the texture for your deck. We also have S's for sideboards that you will usually bring in if your opponent presents you with a threat that you couldn't typically deal with what your deck is normally configured as, maybe an enchantment or a hard to remove artifact or planeswalker, and the B's are the cards that you need to build around before they are at their most efficient. So let's get started right away with Agonizing Siphon. This is 3 and a black sorcery at common to deal 3 damage to any target, and you gain 3 life. Part of me thinks that this was originally at instant speed and only dealt to creatures, and then they fixed it, and I think it's a whole lot better. And I really do like that this is going to nuke pretty much any creature that you're going to see out of your opponent's decks in the early to mid game, at least finish something off. And the fact that it can go to the face to finish somebody off as well is also quite nice. This is a solid 2.5 for me. Next up, we've got the Audacious Thief. 2 and a black creature, human rogue. Common 2/2. Whenever it attacks, you draw a card and lose 1 life. Do yourself a favor and do not let your opponent go unopposed with this thing. Or at least hope that your opponent can't kill yours, because this is a great source of card advantage, especially if you're in the black-white life gain deck, where that life loss will become pretty irrelevant, and the card is just going to be awesome over time. Even if this only gets in for 2 attacks, that's still a lot of card advantage you've accrued, and as you've seen in many of these other videos, card advantage is king in Limited, and is the best way to win a game. Solid 2.25 for me. Next up, we've got Barony Vampire. 2 and a black vampire, common 3/2, and that's it. It's a 1.5, unfortunately. This card is pretty underwhelming. Stats by itself, I mean, it won't trade up usually. It's going to trade down a lot of times, only having 2 toughness, and they're probably just better cards to put into your deck. Moving right along to a card we've recently seen, actually. We just saw this in Ravnica Allegiance with the Rakdos Guild. If I can get that to center up. There we go. This is Bladebrand, 1 and a black instant at common. Target creature gains Death Touch until the end of turn, and you draw a card. I like this as a good combat trick. Unfortunately, we don't have the mass pinger that we did in Ravnica Allegiance, but this is still a pretty good trick here, and it does allow you to draw the card, obviously. It's a good way to get one of your small creatures to trade up with something much bigger. Their opponent might think that it was a safe block. So 1.75 for me. Next up, we have got the Blight Beetle. This little 1/1 is a 1 and a black uncommon creature insect with protection from green, so it cannot be blocked, targeted, dealt damage, enchanted, or equipped by anything green, and creatures your opponent control can't have +1/+1 counters put on them. I did a quick count in, actually it's only green where this actually matters, and they're just, well, there's one card in black that it does. But yeah, there's only a handful of cards that this actually shuts down, so I'm not going to be super hard-pressed to be playing this. They're mostly rares that your opponent will have that can actually be neutered by this ability here. And other than that, it's just a pretty unrolling creature. 1 power is not a lot to get a game done, so I'm going to leave this guy in the sideboard for the most part, but it's a 1.75 because of the utility that it does have against green decks. Moving right along, we have got the Blood Burglar. Come on. There we go. Nice. This is 1 and a black vampire rogue at common. It's a 2/2, and as long as it's your turn, Blood Burglar has lifelink. This is one of the few creatures in black that has naturally lifelink without really any additional help because there's really no real way to give anything lifelink in this set, unfortunately. This is a decent little curve filler. You know, bears are typically always good. 2 mana 2/2s, always playable. And this one does have a bit of upside, and there's enough creatures and cards in this set that do activate with an ability when lifelink is triggered, so there is some utility to this guy as well. 1.75. Next up, we've got Blood for Bones, another awesome Seb Mckinnon artwork here. 3 and a black sorcery, uncommon. As additional cost to cast the spell, sacrifice a creature and return a creature from your graveyard to the battlefield, and then return another creature card from your graveyard back to your hand. Now, this has got some serious power here built into it, but you have to have the cards necessary to get things back. So this is one of the few ways that can actually reanimate the biggest creatures in this format, especially some of the big black demon that we'll get to at the end of the set review is probably one of the premier targets to reanimate with this. The trick is getting those cards in the graveyard first, which there's a number of ways of doing it, but it can still be pretty tricky to do this. But it's still a good value play even if you don't have that. If you have a weak creature that's being locked out by like a pacifism or the blue tap spell, this is a good way to get out from underneath that and get back one of your more powerful creatures. So it's a solid value play, and it's a solid 2 here. Next up, we have our colored artifact for black, blood-soaked altar. 4 black, uncommon artifact. Tap it, pay 2 life, discard a card, sacrifice a creature. So you have to do all 3 of those things to make this work. And you create a 5/5 black demon creature token with flying. Activate this only when you could activate, or cast, I should say, a sorcery. This is a hoop that is this big, on fire, and swinging. And I would argue this is almost not worth it, but the effect is quite good. And if you do want to reanimate something, this is a decent way of getting those cards into the graveyard. But a lot of this is just set up here. I wish there were more things to pay off with this, which there just unfortunately aren't. So I gave the bloodsoaked altar here a B for build arounding. If you can do it, go for it, but otherwise I wouldn't be too excited about putting this in my deck. Next up, we got a card that I will absolutely play, Bloodthirsty Aerialist. I love how the art here is literally upside down. It's really neat. 1 black creature vampire rogue uncommon 2/3 flyer. Whenever you gain life, put a +1/+1 counter on Bloodthirsty Aerialist. So she can quite easily get out of range of the red burn spells in this format, which are pretty powerful. And it's a heck of a beater. And with all the creatures that are in white that have just lifelink on them, the chaplain that just taps to gain life, there's a real argument to be made for playing weaker cards like this to enable such a powerful payoff here. So I gave the airless here a 2.5. There's a lot of power to this card, especially when you can actually enable this multiple times during the game. You can get out of control very, very fast. And next up, Bone Splinters. A single black mana gets you a sorcery at common. As an additional cost to cast, sacrifice a creature and destroy target creature. In the words of Dark Confidant, greatness at any cost. This is a solid 2. Moving on. We've got the Bone-Clad Necromancer. 3 black human wizard at common. 3/3 as it enters the battlefield. You may exile target creature from a graveyard. Important wording there. And if you do, create a 2/2 black zombie creature token. So for 5 mana, I'm happy to get 5 power cost 2 bodies, and it is nice to occasionally neuter a graveyard strategy. Even though those are few and far between, it's still a nice little bit of upside. It's a 2.25 here for me. Nice card. Next up, we have got another one of these just absurd elemental knights here in Cavalier of Night. 2 black mythic rare 4/5 elemental knight. Lifelink. When it enters the battlefield, sacrifice a creature, and when you do, destroy target creature an opponent controls. And whenever it dies, return target creature with converted mana cost 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. So there is a ton of power from this Cavalier here. All of them are just absolutely absurd. None of them are actually what I consider to be truly just completely busted, which is nice to see. They're all beatable, unlike the Titans, which we saw in earlier core sets, which were just completely unrealistic. This is a pretty good one here. I do like this quite a bit. Solid 3.25. Tons of value, like I mentioned, and there are enough ways to recur those creatures that you are sacrificing, even if you can't get it back with its trigger when it dies. So very powerful card here. And again, more lifelink is always good. Moving on, Disfigure. A single black instant at uncommon gets you -2/-2 to target creature. Yeah, you will always play this. This hits enough things for it to be worth it in the early game, and it's to serve as a decent combat trick. I could see this easily taking it first pick in a draft if my pack is relatively weak, and this should always make your black decks. Solid 2.5. Next up is what I am pretty sure is one of just the most disgusting cards in this format for just the flexibility in it. This is Dread Presence. 3 and a black nightmare creature at rare, 3/3. When a swamp enters the battlefield under your control, choose 1. You draw a card and you lose 1 life. Or Dread Presence deals 2 damage to any target and you gain 2 life. This thing is absurd. I can imagine there are worlds and realities where this one locked you into one of these modes, kind of like the Sieges did in Khans and Dragons of Tarkir. But the fact that this has modality to it, no matter what you need it to do, will always be powerful. The only downside is that you actually need swamps, but that's okay. A lot of the black cards in this set are, especially if you're in a heavy black deck, I would not be opposed to just having maybe, just a handful of other colored spells, because there's so many good black cards in this set, whether it's removal or just powerful redundant creatures, and this is one of them for sure here. So this card is awesome. Very, very powerful. 2.75, might be even higher. Definitely an easy slam dunk first pick. And next up, we've got Duress. Good old-fashioned Duress. Single black mana sorcery at common. Target opponent reveals their hand. You choose a non-creature, non-land card from it. That player discards that card. Yeah, this one's always tricky. I am of two minds on this one, In particular, in certain formats where there are a lot of high-power non-creature spells, this is for potentially main deckable. If this had been in War of the Spark, I could have easily made an argument for main decking Duress to rip planeswalkers, powerful removal spells, and things of that nature. Unfortunately here, Duress is just going to be a sideboard card for most limited formats where it's just good to have, and if your opponent has something in their deck that that you can't beat, be it a planeswalker or a powerful spell, it's not completely unrealistic to fire this off the turn before they could cast it to really get them. Unfortunately, there really isn't like the mill deck, for instance, in that we saw in M19, which was a very blue-black heavy deck that featured a lot of enchantments and artifacts to mill your opponents out, where Duress was actually a good weapon against them because they needed so many of their pieces to actually come together and function correctly. So there isn't really a deck like that in this format, so Duress is at a little bit less of a premium here. But again, if they have something you can't beat, I wouldn't be embarrassed to play this, but for the most part, this will stay in the sideboard and in your deck box. Next up, we've got a wild freaking card. I don't think they've ever really utilized text or ruling on this in this manner before. It's very, very cool. This is Embodiment of Agonies. 1 black, rare demon 0/0 with flying and death touch. As it enters the battlefield, it enters with a +1/+1 counter on it for each different mana cost among non-land cards in your graveyard. So unfortunately, it doesn't track lands because those are zeros, unfortunately, which would be probably a bit too good. But for example, it's using 2 and a black and 1 black are different mana costs. So there's a lot of build around me potential for this guy here, or gal, demons, whatever, guy or gal, person. I would shoot for a baseline of 3 before I'm casting this. Any higher than that just makes this thing completely unrealistic to fight against. The death touch is huge, and for the most part, if you get to like the 4 and up range, you're checking everything in this format, and it's going to take, actual removal to take this thing down. Very, very powerful card here indeed. Love this guy, and I like that if it comes, it's not an ETB trigger either. So, like if you were to, it's entering with not as it enters the battlefield that triggers this. That's going to be specific wording for some really rare corner cases, but something to think about. Very, very powerful card here. 2.5 for me. Awesome card. Next up, we have the Epicure of Blood. 4 and a black for a 4/4 common vampire. Whenever you gain life, each opponent loses 1 life. This guy has shown up a couple of times recently in limited formats. I believe he was also in M19, I think. And he really only plays in black-white decks, unfortunately. You know, I'm not going to go out of my way to put him in any other color combination realistically. But with the right pieces, this can easily end games. You know, you do have the 1/3 that with lifelink in white, you have the 1/1 that taps to gain a life. This can easily snowball out of control, and the stats aren't terrible either. So it's a 2.25 for me, but with a heavy build-around component because it really only goes into 1 deck. And I do like that there are some cards like this in this set that really require you to know the archetypes in the limited format, so that you just don't go jamming random cards into your deck that really have no synergy other than just being a creature. So it's a nice little teaching tool, especially for newer players. So 2.25 and a solid build around. Next up, we have got Fathom Fleet Cutthroat. 3 and a black for a human pirate at common 3/3. As it enters the battlefield, destroy target creature an opponent controls that was dealt damage this turn. Now, here's another really cool sort of teaching moment for newer players. You know, just because you can block doesn't mean you always should, right? You know, here's my 4/4 against your 1/1. Oh, no problem. I'll just check that guy. Oh, boom. I just took out your guy too. So there's a really cool push-pull element to this. So if your opponent is in black, especially as being at common, this becomes a very real thing to have to worry about. So, you know, always double check, you know, does your opponent have 4 black mana open? Did you see any of these in your draft? Or, you know, just, it's always something to think about. It's a very cool teaching moment that even in combat or out of combat, you know, damage does matter a bit, as it does with like burn spells and things of that nature. It's just a cool card here and a solid 2.25 for me. Good cost and a good stat to go along with it as well. Next up, we've got Feral Abomination, returning again from probably another core set that I can't think of. It's a 5 and a black, common, 5/5 Thrall with Death Touch. Yeah, cards like this are definitely, I like the cards like this exist, you know, for, like, let's say that you're in a blue-black controlling-esque deck that has a lot of good removal, some counter magic, and some cheap creatures, and the game goes along and you just need a way to end the game, but you didn't open up one of the big bombs like a Cavalier or one of the, you know, one of the Sphinxes or the demons in this set. This is a pretty good way to end a game. 6 mana is quite a bit, but by the time that you've gotten to that late game, you've possibly exhausted all your opponent's resources with all of your removal and whatnot, and this is a decent way to close out a game, especially, like I said, if you are lacking those other bombs. So it's a solid 2, nothing exciting, but still a pretty powerful card in the right context. Next up, we have got a innocuously powerful card here. This is Gorging Vulture. 2 and a black bird at common, 2/2 flying, and as it enters the battlefield, put the top 4 cards of your library into your graveyard. You gain 1 life for each creature card put into your graveyard this way. I would not be so concerned with gaining life with this thing. What I'm concerned with doing is putting giant creatures in the graveyard and getting them back with reanimation spells. So this guy has a bit of a build around me component to him. It also has some really cool art. I like the purpley eyes. It's very nice. So yeah, this is one of the best ways in black, especially in this set for that matter, to really fuel a good reanimator strategy. It's a small enough component of black that you don't have to go super out of your way to get those creatures back. And if you have things like Gravedigger, which we'll see literally in just a second, you know, even if you do, you know, miss out on some of the cards that you need to get the deck rolling, you can still get them back otherwise. So Gorging Vulture here is a solid 2.25 for me, and with a bit of a build around me component as well, just because sometimes you want to make sure you've got creatures to play with, but at the same time you can get them back, no problem there. And this is how you do it. We've got Gravedigger here. 3 and a black, 2/2 zombie, uncommon. As it enters the battlefield, return target creature card from your graveyard to your hand. Awesome stuff here. I don't think there has ever been a limited format in which Gravedigger was printed in that he wasn't playable. This will always be playable. One of Black's sort of hallmark abilities in Limited, especially for core sets, has always been the ability to bring back creatures to your hand, replay them, and get more additional value out of them, especially if you pair this with like blue and be able to blink this a few times. You can get some real value going with this guy, and this will always be a great card for black to have. And even in the most aggressive of black decks, I can see a spot for Gravedigger to get back a few key pieces to your aggressive strategy. Very good card here, solid 2.25 for me. Bread and butter for black. Next up, we've got the gruesome Scourger. This guy he's ugly. 3 black, oak warrior, orc warrior, uncommon 3/3. As it enters the battlefield, it deals damage to target opponent or planeswalker equal to the number of creatures that you control. So when I first saw this, I just immediately thought it was Grey Merchant of Asphodel, like 2.0. It's nowhere close. Let's get that right out of the way. But it does play a nice effect here. So, obviously a good go wide strategy, if your board state is looking really clogged up and no one can make a good attack here, and you just have this come down at the top end of your curve and just fireball your opponent, pretty good effect there. And it's also the good top end of a curve for a very aggressive deck that just needs to get in, those last few points of damage before the board gets clogged up or their relatively weak creatures get blown up or destroyed. So I give it a solid 2 here. He has a bit of duality to him. I like it, but I'm not super thrilled. At least the stats are good if he has to get into combat as well. Next up, we have got Knight of the Ebon. Knight of the Ebon Legion. A single black gets you a Vampire Knight at rare, 1/2, and you can pay Tuna black, and it gets +3/+3 and Death Touch until the end of turn, pushing its stats to 4/5. And at the beginning of your instep, if a player lost 4 or more life this turn, put a +1/+1 counter on Knight of the Ebon Legion. So this card is very, very powerful here. It's good for a couple of points early in the game, especially if your opponent has a relatively slow start. And in the late game, this gets completely out of control if you're able to put the pressure on, and this keeps just getting, it doesn't even have to get bigger, you just have to put creatures on the board to attack with it. And if you can start knocking in for 4+ points of damage a turn, the game's going to end very quickly, and in most part due to this guy right here. I could easily see, black-white vampires, kind of coming back into the forefront for standard. Granted, Teferi exists, but anyway, like I said, this is good for a couple of early points in the early game and can very easily turn the tide for a game. The stats get really out of control quickly, and at any point, if just by himself, the fact that he can trigger his own ability is quite powerful here. Very, very good stuff. 2.5 for me. Next up, we've got the Legion's End. This is 1 in a black sorcery at rare. Exile target creature an opponent controls with converted mana cost 2 or less, and all the creatures that player controls with the same name as the creature. Then that player reveals his hand, or their hand, and exiles all creatures with the same with that name from, exiles all cards with that name from their hand and graveyard. I know this is trying to say, I'm just shortcutting all of it all of a sudden. This is a really awkward card to have in Limited. This is obviously more geared towards actual constructed formats where you will have, 4 ofs in most creature decks, like things like Tarmogoyf, Dark Confidant. I'm trying to think of some common played creatures in Standard right now, which I'm having a hard time doing. The Ashino Pyromancer, there we go. Yeah, that guy. That's the thing that this hits. Yeah, and unfortunately there just aren't enough, power targets for this card in Limited, but at least it's removal, but it's still crappy removal. It's a 1.5, unfortunately. Moving right along, we've got Ley Line of the Void, 2 black enchantment at rare. If it was in your opening hand, you may begin with it on the battlefield, and if a card would put into your opponent's graveyard from anywhere, exile it instead. So, unlike our blue Ley Line, this actually doesn't have a whole lot of play into this format. Obviously we've touched a little bit on those graveyard shenanigans already, but I don't think those are prevalent enough for this to be a factor in your limited decks. I would say it's sideboard, but even then it's basically a 0 at sideboarding levels. Like I said, there's not enough graveyard shenanigans in this set outside of black to really make this remotely playable. I'll just point you this way over to Modern and Hogak. So there you go. Moving on, we've got ourselves a classic, Mind Rot. 2 and a black for a sorcery at common. Target player discards 2 cards. So, limited games, especially in core sets, are very grindy. You know, people trading for resources, jockeying for board position, and this is a great way to break up the tempo of the game, especially into the mid to late game where your opponents may be top decking, and you just need to make sure that they don't have anything left. Mind Rot is a great tool for that, and will always be playable in limited formats where things can get a little bogged down. Solid 2. Very good to see this card back. As is this next card. Man, I am so glad to see Murder back. Murder things dead. 1 black, common, instant, destroy target creature. This used to be uncommon, and it's now common. Or uncommon, now it's common, yeah. This is by far the best removal in the set, if you ask me. Uncontested removal, it doesn't have to deal damage, it doesn't have to destroy, a specific kind of creature like a non-black or a non-artifact. This is just hands down uncontested removal. Slam dunk this. Every black deck will play this. This is an easy first pick if your pack is weak, and will always, like I said, make your black decks of any sealed format that you're playing with M20. Always play Murder. And next up, we have Noxious Grasp. A single 1 and a black gets you an uncommon instant, destroy target creature or planeswalker, that's green or white, and you gain 1 life. Nice. Easy one to say. This is just sideboard here. Bring it against those green and white decks and be happy. Otherwise, leave it at home. And next up, we've got ourselves a card that basically broke the internet for a good 5 minutes when this was first spoiled here. We have Rotting Regice. 2 and a black, zombie dinosaur rare, 7/6. At the beginning of your upkeep, discard a card. I'm really mad I couldn't find a high-res version of this art because I wanted this to just be the background for this video the whole time. But alas, maybe sooner or later. This is seriously powerful stuff here, to an average player, a new player specifically, they'll look at this and go, well, discarding cards is bad, but most seasoned players know that if you're discarding cards, you're playing it in a deck that wants to have those cards discarded. So things like in Modern, where you're discarding things to Tarmogoyf, or you're discarding like Arc-like Phoenixes, or Dredge stuff. These are all, just random examples, but even in Limited, if you can bring those creatures back, or if you're using like Gravedigger or you're using reanimation spells, this is not a drawback at all. And 7/6 is huge. So yeah, with stats like that, you will not be missing those cards. And if you can find any way to recur them, is just awesome. It's a 2.5 because unfortunately it can be blocked pretty easily. And it doesn't, without trample, which would push this thing way over the top, I think. This is still just a very powerful card here. 2.5 for me. Awesome card, awesome flavor. Very, very cool. Next up, we've got Sanitarium Skeleton. A single black mana at common, 1/2, creature skeleton. 2 and a black to return Sanitarium Skeleton from your graveyard to your hand. Oh, look, it's best friends with the Regice. Not really. It's not actually that. But it is good that you do have the ability to play this, block with it, bring it back on their instant, especially once you get to the mid to late game. This is a great way to kind of pad out your life total and just keep the game under control until you can find your bombs or whatever way you need to take over the game. It's real underwhelming otherwise, though, and to put this in your deck, you are making some concessions to it. But it's decently powerful, and I can see some spaces where this is a relevant thing to have, and it's also good sacrifice fodder for the cards that require that extra cost. Things like Bone Splinters play really well with this guy as well. So he's a 1.5. He's a role player, but he's pretty enrolling beyond that. And next up, we got a card that is. This card is so bizarre. I would have never thought to have seen a card like this in a standard set. This is Scheming Symmetry. A single black sorcery at rare. Choose 2 target players. Each of them searches their library for a card, then shuffles their library and puts that card on top of it. Yeah, this is basically Demonic Tutor for 2 players. this is weird. This is really weird stuff here. I can say 100% unequivocally, do not play this outside of two-headed giant pre-releases. Don't even touch this. Do not give your opponent the ability to put a card on top of their library. It's not even worth it. But by all means, if you have this in your two-headed giant pre-release pool, pick yourself and your partner and say, hey, let's go get really powerful cards to draw next turn. So do that with this. There might be a little bit of goofy play to this in Modern, especially with things like Thought Scour. I don't know. This card's weird, but yeah, it's a flat 0 outside of two-headed giant pre-release limited. Wouldn't touch this with this 10-foot pole. Next up, we've got Sorcerer of the Fang. 1 and a black human wizard at common. It's a 1/3, and you can pay 5 and a black and tap it, and it deals 2 damage to target opponent or creature. So this guy I like because it has some pretty solid stats. It's a good early game blocker, and if the game does go long enough, all of a sudden this turns into a pretty relevant threat, especially if your opponent has taken some chip shots or is just in relatively low life. This can I'm not say easily, but can play a pretty serious part in actually ending the game and putting some real pressure on your opponent, and they would hate to have to use removal on this guy. So pretty powerful card here. It's a 1.75 for me. Next up, we have got our Planeswalker in black, Sauron the Imperious Bloodlord, who's looking quite spry and a bit Abercrombie, if you ask me. 2 and a black for a legendary Planeswalker Sauron, mythic rare, 4 starting loyalty. His first +1 ability lets you gain, gives you a creature you control, death touch, and lifelink until the end of turn. And if it's a vampire, put a +1/+1 counter on it. +1 allows you to sacrifice a vampire, and when you do, Sauron deals 3 damage to target creature to any target, and you gain 3 life. And for -3, you may put a vampire creature card from your hand onto the battlefield. So this is unfortunate here because the first plus ability that gives a creature death touch and lifelink is really the only ability on Sauron that actually will make a difference in a game here. The number of vampires that are in this set are pretty underwhelming, and the ones that you do have are better off just attacking. I can't imagine you wanting to use that plus ability to deal damage, just have the creatures attack, and the -3 is basically completely irrelevant. So Sauron is primarily a build around me. You need to have as many vampires as you can get, and them being only in black really hurts the ability to make this thing better than it is. I don't know where this guy is going to land, but he's a build around me, and if you can, he's still just a 2. He's not very exciting, unfortunately. Yeah, Vengeful Bloodlord out of War Spark, much better. And next up, we've got ourselves a little recursion spell in Soul Salvage. Tuna black sorcery at common returns up to 2 target creature cards from your graveyard back to your hand. As we've already discussed here a little bit, black is at its best when it's a recurring value from creatures, letting them die to kill a creature, letting them die to reanimate another creature. That's kind of what black's shtick is for the most part in most limited sets. And so this card is a really good player in that. You don't have to necessarily be getting back those massively powerful creatures. Just any good creature is going to be good for this. This is a solid value play and a solid 2 in most mid-rangey black decks is where I'll play this. And next up, we've got Thought Distortion. And creepy art aside, this card sucks. 4 black sorcery at uncommon. It cannot be counter, and target opponent reveals their hand, and you exile all non-creature, all non-land, non-creature spells from their hand and graveyard. I had to read this several times to make sure I wasn't missing something. But for 6 mana, this is a complete waste of a card, just flat out. The chances of playing against a deck that is so spell heavy at the point in the game where this is actually going to be, castable, basically 0. Exiling their graveyard's one thing, but there's no Snapcaster mages in this set to really do anything with it. It's basically unplayable. It's a flat 0, unfortunately, and yeah, let's go on to a better card. Undead Servant. is next. 3 and a black zombie at common, 3/2. Whenever it enters the battlefield, create a 2/2 black zombie creature token for each card named Undead Servant in your graveyard. So here is our cares about other cards with the same name card in black. With about 3+ of these, this becomes a really powerful card here. Anything less than that makes it pretty underwhelming. The stats alone do make it playable, but like I said, when you have 3 or more copies of this in your deck, go ham and draft by all means. This just makes a massive, massive army and really makes your opponent, question, do I block and let this thing die and let my opponent have more zombies next turn, or do they just let through those 3 points of damage? This is a very, very powerful card in the right context. A definite build around me, but once you've got the deck going, super strong power. And next up, we've got more awesome Seb Mckinnon art. I have to wonder, what a set. Like even, like a signature spell book, with that only has Seb Mckinnon art. What does that look like? How sexy would that be? Because this card is amazing. It's art-wise, the card itself is kind of underwhelming. Tuna black for an enchantment aura gets you Unholy Indentures. Enchants a creature, and when that enchanted creature dies, return that card to the battlefield under your control with a +1/+1 counter on it. Redundancy is always good in limited here, but I do want to have a solid ETB effect before I'm actually considered playing this. So probably in black, green, or black, blue is where I'm going to have this. There aren't really enough in the other colors to pair with this. That'll make it be worth it. It's a 1.75 for this. And unfortunately, having the tap and bounce removal in blue can make this be a pretty disastrous play if they just tag whatever you enchant with this the turn after you play it. So be careful with this one. Next up, we have got Vampire of the Dire Moon. A single black mana gets you a vampire creature at uncommon 1/1 with death touch and lifelink. I wish this thing were bigger. Just flat out. Make it cost 2 mana. I don't care. I wish this thing were bigger because the stats are so good. Like Vampire Nighthawk is such like an iconic black creature, and they can't like reinvent this and reinvent that with this, but it's so freaking close. The biggest problem with stats like this, it's a lot of text, granted. You'll be like, oh, this can trade for anything, but this isn't it's only a good defender at that, and it's not even good at that, doing it that well. So like attacking with this, your opponent won't block this. They won't attack into this until they can actually clear it out. It's such a trap, So yeah, it's uncommon, yeah, it's a vampire, yeah, it's cheap, but I would not go out of my way to make this thing be like the cornerstone of my deck here. Really, really underwhelming. 1.75. It's playable, but barely. Next up, we've got Vengeful Warchief. 4 and a black orc warrior, uncommon 4/4. Whenever you lose life for the first time each turn, put a +1/+1 counter on Vengeful Warchief. This is an interesting card here. If it costs a little bit less, it turns into an absolute threat. But being at 5 puts it on a really awkward place in the curve for an ability like this. The board might have already gotten clogged up, or your opponent's kind of already starting to stall out, and this is just kind of how you turn the tide of the game. I can't see this thing getting all that big. And unfortunately, with the things like pacifism, unsummon, this becomes a real liability to get it really big and try and do something with it. So I give it a solid 2. The stats are good, but I just can't see this thing really doing a whole lot in any given game of Magic. Next up, we have got our big bad legendary for black. This is Villus, Broker of Blood. 5 black, 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 legendary creature, demon at rare. It's an 8/8 with flying. You can pay a black and pay 2 life. Target creature gets -1/-1 until the end of turn. And whenever you lose life, draw that many cards. This is pretty nuts. This is pretty nuts here. It's just too much to reliably cast it, but reanimating it might have something there. So unfortunately, power level aside, because this is quite a powerful card here to be sure. I just had to give Villus a 1.5 just for being 8 mana. But if you get it in play somehow, I think you're going to win that game pretty handily. And next up, we have got our last black card in Yarok's Fenlurker. Black for a horror uncommon. Whenever it enters the battlefield, each opponent exiles a card from their hand. You may pay 2 and a black, give it +1/+1 till the end of turn, and as a 1/1 to start out with. So, unfortunately, this guy isn't all that great. Obviously, this wants to be played with Yarok, who would double trigger the ETB effect here. But really playing this on a crucial turn, the turn before opponent is about to go and play their big bomb, or they're really running low on cards, is about the best you can hope to do with this. Otherwise, he's just pretty underwhelming, unfortunately. So it's a 1.5, has some utility to it, but not much beyond that. So, that is our last black card, guys and gals, and general internet content magic consumers, if you will. I really like black in this set. There's a lot of really powerful cards here. You know, having only done white, blue, and black, I can definitely say that blue and black are the front runners for the most powerful colors in the set. Will that change in red? We'll definitely have to find out. And in green, who knows? There's just big bad fatties in that color all around. So yeah, definitely let me know down in the comments. Did I get a card completely right? Am I, wrong to say that Villus is actually completely playable and is unbeatable in this format? Who knows? So let me know down in the comments. Did I get it right? Did I get it wrong? What card are you most excited to open for your pre-release? What are you most excited to draft moving into this next sort of draft season, if you will? So don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. We'll be doing plenty more of these videos. We've got at least 3 more of these to put up for M20, and then we'll be doing some pre-release sort of follow-up content from there, and then who knows what else we're going to do in the coming weeks. So once again, thank you guys so much for watching, and have an excellent, excellent night.